Going to recognize the ranking member of the committee now for 5 minutes, Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Governor, it's good to see you back. I remember when you were a member of this committee, you had kind things to say about early childhood education. You mentioned that the child care aspects of it will benefit the parents. Could you say a word about the long-term benefits to the student?
Yeah, several long-term longitudinal studies that have taken place over decades have showed the tremendous benefit of early childhood education, often to the tune of $7 to $12 for every dollar invested in quality early childhood education. Where do those savings come from? Better high school graduation rates, lower youth adjudication rates, less interactions with law enforcement, safer, higher earning potential. So a number of benefits have been shown from not just preschool and kindergarten, but quality birth to 4 as well, to make sure that all kids have the advantage that some kids have of parents reading to them, of words spoken, of books discussed, and that's important to bring to more children to address this achievement gap before it occurs. It's harder to address in 3rd grade and 5th grade than it is to prevent it from occurring in the first place.
And along those lines, I remember one thing you said, that you were on a study committee when you were in the state Senate, and concluded we're talking about high school achievement. And the best way to improve high school achievement was to put all your money in early childhood education and wait 10 years.
You have an excellent memory, Mr. Ranking Member. So yes, the preface to the report, of course, it's no excuse not to reform our high schools now, and we want to improve them, but they will look much better and perform much better if every child gets a strong early childhood education.
Can you say a word about the importance of assessments and accountability in K through 12?
Yeah, assessments and accountability is critical, and that's one of the major deficiencies in some of these so-called choice models in states like Arizona, where we won't even know as a state, as a country, what works, what leads to increased student achievement, and what doesn't. It's important in higher ed, it's important in K-12. If we're all about, and a number of members on both sides of the aisle have said, let's make sure kids learn math, reading, writing, that's what we should focus on. We need to make sure we know whether they are achieving at grade level in those areas. And therefore, while no one enjoys assessment, it's really important to make sure that we're accountable for all students and that we can address persistent achievement gaps that occur along racial lines, along income lines, along geographic lines, and that we can have strategies to address those.
Thank you. Mr. Sullivan, you mentioned the short-term Pell legislation that's pending now. You didn't mention last year the House passed a short-term Pell bill. There was a specific amendment to the Competes bill. The short-term Pell had overwhelming Democratic support. The bill, Competes bill, passed with overwhelming Democratic support, but it did not survive. So there, and you've heard from this side, there is strong support. You've also heard some problems with some of the for-profit. And what we don't want to happen is we have short-term Pels and you set up some little storefront operations that deal out worthless credentials and take all the Pell money. Question is, how would you differentiate the good programs from the bad programs?
Great question, and thank you for your leadership around Workforce Pell and with this this group, this body in the past. I want to, take a step back for 1 second, and I would really like for you to think about within the context of Workforce Pell, we are opening up opportunities for people to be able to be educated in a shorter period of time. I know I've said that a couple of times, but it is so very important.
We agree on that. Our community colleges have programs 6 to 16 weeks, tremendous programs. The question is, if you open it up to everybody, you're going to be wasting a lot of money unless you have a screen that only appropriate vendors can get access to it. And how do you separate the good from the bad?
Look, it's a matter of employment. It's a matter of earnings. It's about job demand. It's about ensuring that people get value from the experience. And I would urge that we continue down the path on the accountability front. This issue is too big for America's public institutions only to solve. With 60 million adults with a high school diploma or less.
We're trying to write legislation. Let me ask the other witnesses, if they would have a quick statement about how we can legislate that would divide the good from the bad.
I would echo the fact that you should look at value and cost rather than modality or method or delivery mode. We certainly do not believe that online, for example, is a great delimiter of quality. It's like the number of individuals today who are actually utilizing online mode, especially with public and private nonprofit institutions like WGU. It's ultimately about whether that program is delivered at a cost relative to the value of that program in the marketplace.
Can you legislate along those lines? I mean, we got to write legislative language that separates the good from the bad. Do you have examples of what we can use?
Yeah, I certainly think that you can utilize things around key results around how do students complete those programs, what is the attainment rate of jobs and opportunities of completers of those programs, and what was that value relative to the cost of actually completing the program. I think that increasing transparency and accountability at institutional level is certainly possible.
I think the chairman's question is very important. I'm going to let it go on, but don't take too long, please.
Yeah, and I'll be brief, and I applaud WGU for, in the absence of federal criteria, really thoughtfully coming up with their own criteria, and that could help form part of a template for what the federal government looks at to maximize return on investment from investments that are made.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, I think you've heard from the answer that the for-profit, nonprofit is not the split, because there's some good for-profits and some they're bad nonprofits. But we got to figure out how to make sure that the money is being spent well, and I think we're in agreement on that, and it's an important possibility that we can get done.
Yes, sir. That's why I wanted to let the questions go on.
I thought so.
Mr.